By the summer the wells went dry. I had 11 men asking for my hand, and I married the one the whole county laughed at. I am an old woman now, and I have buried most of the people who laughed, so there is no harm in telling it plain. Stay with me to the end of this, because I promise you that by the time the rain came back to the Texas hills, you will understand why a woman with her pick of suitors chose the man who walked up my road in rags. Tell me where you are listening from, so I know how far this old story has wandered. In the 3rd year of the drought, our part of the hill country had turned the color of a dead fire. The grass that had once run silver in the wind was brown to the root, and the creeks that fed the pedernales had shrunk to chains of green pools where the cattle stood all day with their heads down. Men spoke of leaving. Some had already gone, nailing their doors shut and driving east with everything they owned lashed to a wagon. The land was killing us slow, and the only thing keeping the Mercer Ranch alive was the spring. It rose cold and steady out of a limestone shelf behind the house, the way it had since long before my Eli's people first put a fence on that ground, and in a dying country a spring that did not quit was worth more than gold. I had 30 horses, good Spanish-blooded stock that Eli had spent his life breeding, and I had water when no one else did, and I was a widow of 31 with no children and no man to speak for me. That was the arithmetic that brought the suitors. I was not fool enough to think it was my green eyes. They came on Sundays after church in their good coats, with their hats in their hands and their boots polished against the dust. Cattlemen who had buried wives, young men sent by their fathers, a banker from Fredericksburg who smelled of bay rum and counted my fence posts while he talked. They told me I could not run the place alone. They were not wrong, and that was the cruelty of it. They came offering rescue with one hand and reaching for the spring with the other, and I learned to smile and pour coffee and tell them I was not yet ready to think on such things. Of all of them, the one the county had already decided I would marry was Preston Vance. Vance was a land agent out of San Antonio who had taken a fine house in town 2 years before and made himself agreeable to everyone. He was handsome in the way a new coin is handsome, bright and smooth and easy in his manners, and he had a gift for making a person feel they were the only soul he had ever truly listened to. He brought my mother's old friends small gifts. He gave money to the church roof. When he sat in my parlor, he never once mentioned the spring, which I noticed, because every other man could not stop himself from mentioning it. He spoke instead of how lonely the country must be for me, and how a woman like me deserved softness. He was patient as a cat at a mouse hole, and the whole town told me I was lucky he had set his eye my way. I might have married him. I want you to understand that because it matters to what came after. I was tired in a way that goes down to the marrow, and Preston Vance was offering to carry the weight, and there were nights I lay awake thinking that tired women cannot afford to be particular. Then, on a white-hot afternoon in July, a stranger came walking up my road, and nothing in my life ran the same way after. I saw him from the porch first, a shape wavering in the heat off the wagon track, coming on foot, which no man with any standing did in that country. As he came closer, I saw the state of him. His coat had been mended so many times the patches had patches, and the soles of his boots were lashed on with rawhide. He was burned dark by the sun and lean to the bone, and he carried everything he owned in a flour sack over one shoulder. The hired hands stopped their work to stare. He stopped at the gate and took off his ruined hat, and he asked, in a low and careful voice, whether the lady of the house had worked for a man who knew horses. Behind me, one of the suitors who had lingered after dinner laughed out loud. I remember it because it told me something. The stranger heard the laugh and did not so much as flinch, and a man who can stand still inside another man's contempt is a man who has been poor a long time and made his peace with it. I asked him his name. He said it was Jonah Reed. I asked what he knew of horses, and he told me he had broken and doctored them since he was a boy, and that he asked for no wage but food and a place in the barn until the work ran out. I should have sent him on. A wise widow does not take a ragged stranger onto a place full of valuable stock. But there was a boy among us, the brute child who carried water for my hands, And while the grown men sneered, Jonah Reed had crouched down and pressed something into that boy's palm. When the boy opened his hand, it was a little horse no longer than his thumb, carved out of cedar so fine you could see the mane. I never learned where Jonah had whittled it or when. He simply had it ready, the way some men always have a kind word ready. I told him he could sleep in the barn and we would see. He mentioned my husband only once that first evening, and quietly when the others had gone. He said he had known an Eli Mercer in the war, and asked if it was the same man. I told him my Eli had died of a fever 2 years past, and I watched something move across that burned face. Grief held still the way he had held still against the laughter. He said he was sorry to hear it, and that Eli Mercer had been the best man he ever served beside, and then he said no more. I lay awake that night turning it over. I told myself 100 ragged men had served in the war, and that any of them might claim to have known my husband to soften a widow's heart. But Jonah Reed had asked for nothing. That was the thing I could not fit anywhere. Every man who came up my road wanted something. This one had given a child a toy and gone to sleep in my barn and wanted nothing at all. The difference between Jonah Reed and Preston Vance revealed itself slowly, the way the truth of a horse reveals itself, not in the first hour but in the long days of work. Vance continued his courtship through that hot summer with all the polish in the world. He arrived in a fine buggy with the top up against the sun, and he sat in my cool parlor and spoke beautifully of the life he would give me, of a house in town and a girl to do the washing and trips to the coast when the heat grew unbearable. His words were like water poured from a silver pitcher, and they ran off me and left nothing behind, though I could not have told you then why. Jonah in the same weeks did not court me at all. He worked. He found the gate to the south pasture sagging on its hinges and mended it before I had thought to ask. He saw that the spring's flow had been failing. Not from the drought alone, but because the old channel had silted and a slab of limestone had shifted across the mouth, and he spent 3 brutal days clearing it with a bar in his bare hands until the cold water ran full again, and I wept at the sight of it. He gentled a 2-year-old filly that had thrown every man who tried her, and he did it without a whip, talking to her low for the better part of a week until she followed him like a dog. And everywhere he went, he left those little horses. One on the windowsill of the bunkhouse, one on the lip of the trough for the children who came to fetch water. One I found, set quietly on the porch rail outside my door one morning facing the rising sun. He never spoke of them. The children of the county began to collect them, and a thing started up among them, a kind of game, where finding a Reed horse on your fence post meant good luck had passed your way. I would catch myself watching for them. I would catch myself, more than I liked, watching for him. Vance promised. Jonah did. That was the whole of it, though it took me half a summer to see it written so plainly. One man told me what my life would become. The other simply made my life better, every single day, and asked for nothing in return but a roof over the straw. I am ashamed to say I still might have chosen wrong, because the whole weight of the county was leaning on me to choose Vance, and a person leaned on hard enough will fall the way they are pushed. What changed the course of everything was not my wisdom. It was a piece of paper. It came in August, when the drought had grown so cruel that men were shooting their own starving cattle rather than watch them suffer. A writer brought it out from town, an official-looking document with a seal, and when I read it my hands went cold despite the heat. It was a claim against the ranch, a note for a great sum of money that it said my Eli had borrowed against the land years before, and that had now come due, with interest, into the hands of a collector. The land office in town held it now. The paper said that if I could not pay, the ranch and all its water would be sold against the debt within 60 days. I did not have a tenth of that sum. No one in that dying country did. I will tell you that I sat down on my own front step and could not get up for an hour. 2 years I had fought to hold what Eli left me, through drought and loneliness and the slow grinding fear, and a single sheet of paper was going to take it all. I thought of Eli, who had never in his life carried a secret debt that I knew of, and I could not make the man I had married fit the man named on that page. And while I sat there, Jonah Reed came up from the spring with his sleeves rolled and the cold water still dark on his arms, and he saw my face and asked me what was wrong. And for reasons I cannot fully explain to this day, I handed a ragged stranger the paper that would ruin me, because he was the only person on that whole place I was not afraid would use it against me. He read it slowly, the way a man reads who learned his letters late and respects them for the labor they cost him. When he finished, he did not say a soft thing to comfort me. He said the note was wrong. He said it with a certainty that startled me, and when I asked him how a hired man could know such a thing, he only said that Eli Mercer would not have borrowed against his wife's water without telling her, and that he would stake his life on it. Then he folded the paper and handed it back and said he would help me fight it, and that I should trust him. And there was something in the plainness of it, no flourish, no promise of the moon, that I believed more than every beautiful word Preston Vance had ever spoken. That night Vance came again, and this time he did not speak of trips to the coast. He spoke of the debt. He had heard of it already, which I marked even in my distress, and he laid out before me a tidy salvation. If I would marry him, he said, his resources could clear the note before the 60 days ran out, and the ranch would be saved, and I need never trouble my head about money again. It was rescue, offered with that warm and steady gaze, and a younger and more frightened version of me wanted badly to seize it. But I had spent a summer learning the difference between a man who promises and a man who does, and a small cold voice in me asked why Preston Vance already knew the exact sum of a debt that had reached me only that morning. I told him I needed time. He did not like it. For just a moment the warmth went out of his face like a lamp turned down, and I saw something underneath that I had not seen before, and then it was gone and the smile was back. But I had seen it. You cannot unsee a thing like that. I married Jonah Reed 11 days later in the front room of the Prout house, with a justice of the peace and 4 witnesses, and not one of them able to meet my eye for the shame they felt on my behalf. The county could not forgive it. The widow Mercer, who could have had the finest man in 3 counties, had thrown herself away on a saddle tramp in rags, surely to spite Preston Vance, surely out of grief madness, surely for some reason that made the gossips' tongues run hot for a month. I let them talk. I had thought it through in the cold light of my desperation, and the logic of it was this. A husband had a legal standing to fight that note that a widow did not, and of all the men who would gladly take that standing, only one had ever asked me for nothing. It was a practical marriage. That is what I told myself and what I told him, and he agreed to it gravely, that it was a partnership for the saving of the land and no more, and he would honor it and ask nothing I did not offer. But I will tell you the moment the practical thing cracked open, because it was so small. After the justice spoke his words and it was done, Jonah took my hand to slide on a ring, and he had no ring, of course, a man with rawhide for boot soles. So he had carved one. It was a band of cedar no thicker than a wheat straw, sanded so smooth it shone, with a horse's head cut into it so fine I had to hold it to the light to see. He had made me a ring the way he made the children their horses, out of nothing but a knife and his patience. And when he slid that little circle of wood onto my finger his hands were shaking, this man who did not flinch at anything. And I understood all at once that the thing between us had never been practical at all, not for him. And God help me, not for me. The trouble came fast after that, the way it does once it's sensed that you mean to fight it. First the dry talk in town turned to something colder. Men I had known all my life crossing the street to avoid my new husband, the storekeeper short with him, work that had been promised suddenly given to others. Then, on a moonless night 2 weeks into our marriage, someone fouled the spring. Jonah found it at dawn. A dead hog dragged down and pushed into the channel above the limestone shelf, the cold clean water gone thick and poisoned, the one thing that had kept us alive turned against us. The horses could not drink it. In that drought, with every other water for 30 miles gone to mud, it was a death sentence drawn out over a few thirsty days, and it was no accident. It was a message. I have never in my life been as angry as I was that morning, and I would have ridden into town and put a torch to Preston Vance's fine house, because I knew without proof whose hand was behind it. It was Jonah who stopped me. He did not stop me with soft words. He stood in front of my horse and said that if we struck back in the dark the way they struck us, then we became the same as them, and the only thing we had that they did not was that we were in the right, and a person who trades that away to feel the satisfaction of a blow has nothing left worth keeping. Then he set to work. He hauled that hog out and buried it. He dammed the fouled channel and dug a fresh one through the limestone to a lower seep, 3 days of labor that would have broken a younger and stronger man. And he ran the horses on hauled water in the meantime, hauling it himself by the barrel from a pool 4 miles off, through the worst heat I ever lived through, until the spring ran clean again. He never raised his voice. He never raised his hand. And the whole time the county watched. That was the turning, though I did not see it happening. People had expected the ragged stranger to be what they had decided he was, a drifter, a fortune hunter, a man of no account who would either run at the first hard thing or lash out and prove their contempt right. Instead, they watched a man bury his enemy's cruelty without a word and dig water out of solid rock to save horses that were not even his. And slowly, the way a current turns a heavy boat, the talk began to change. The Prout boy's mother brought us bread. A neighbor came of his own accord with his wagon to help haul water. Old Mrs. Das, who had not approved of one thing in her life, told the women at the store that whatever else Jonah Reed was, he was no coward and no liar, and that was more than she could say for some men who never got dust on their boots. And one evening a clerk from the land office, a nervous young man named Tom Ackerley, rode out to our place in the dark and would not come inside, and stood by his horse in the yard, and told us he could not sleep for what he knew. What he knew was this, and it is the heart of the whole matter, so I will tell it the way it came out, slow, over that night and the days after. The note against the ranch was real in one sense and a forgery in another, and the truth of it reached back into the war and into my own husband's silence. Eli Mercer, my Eli, had once carried a wounded man out of a burning field under fire, a man left for dead by everyone else, and had refused to put him down though it nearly cost him his own life. That man was Jonah Reed. They had not seen each other in the years after, but Eli had heard, somewhere along the way, that Reed had fallen on terrible times, that his small farm in the next territory was failing, and his family near to ruin. And Eli, without ever telling me, because he knew I would have worried over money we did not have to spare, had quietly put his own name behind a loan to save Jonah Reed's land. He had guaranteed the debt of the man whose life he had saved, asking nothing, telling no one, and then he had died of a fever before any of it was settled, and the paper had simply gone on existing in the world, a kindness left lying around like a loaded gun. Preston Vance was no land agent. He was a man who made his living finding such papers, old debts and dead men's signatures, and twisting them into weapons to take land that was suddenly worth killing for. He had found Eli's old guarantee. He had seen that it touched the only living spring in a dying county, and he had forged the note up into a monstrous sum it had never been, with false interest and a false transfer, and he had courted the grieving widow on the one hand while preparing to steal her water on the other, the two hands of the same patient cruelty. The laugh, that first day at my gate, the bay rum, the gifts to the church, all of it was the cat at the mouse hole. And here is the thing that broke me open when I understood it, the thing that explained the rags. Jonah Reed had learned the year before that Eli was dead. He had learned that the debt Eli signed to save him still stood, and that it could now fall upon Eli's widow and take everything she had. And so Jonah had done the only thing a man of his nature could do. He had sold his farm, the very land Eli's signature had saved, and his stock, and his tools, every single thing he owned in the world, and he had used the money to pay off the true and legitimate portion of that old debt, every honest dollar of it, so that it could never be used against me. He had beggared himself to settle his dead friend's secret kindness. He had arrived at my gate in rags not because he was a failure, but because his honor had cost him everything he had. and he had come not to court me, but to work off in labor whatever remained, and to stand between Eli's widow and whatever was coming, quietly, expecting nothing, the way he left wooden horses on fence posts. The forged note was Vance's crime, and it was Jonah's ruin that exposed it. Because Jonah had paid the real debt and kept his receipts, every paper signed and witnessed, the sum Vance was claiming could be proved a lie down to the penny. Tom Ackerley had the office records that did not match the seal on Vance's document. Between Jonah's receipts and the clerk's courage, we had it, the whole fraud laid bare, and we took it not into the dark but into the daylight, to the county judge and to every honest man who would look. Vance ran before they could arrest him, which is the way of such men, and the false note died, and the ranch and the spring were mine, free and clean, exactly as Eli had always meant them to be. The rain came in October. I remember it because I had stopped believing in it, the way you stop believing in things that have failed you long enough. It came in off the gulf in a great gray wall, and it broke over the hills and ran in the dry creeks and stood in silver sheets across the burned pastures, and the horses ran through it with their tails up like colts. Jonah and I stood on the porch and watched the country come back to life, and I took his hand, the rough scarred hand that had dug water out of rock for me, and I did not let it go, and neither of us said anything for a long while, because by then we had learned that the things that matter most are mostly said without words. We were married 51 years. We raised 4 children on that ground and buried one, and the spring never failed us again. And in all that time, Jonah Reed never once told me what he had given up to come to me. I learned the whole of it from Tom Ackerley and from the records, and, years later, from a yellowed letter of Eli's I found that explained the rest. Jonah would have carried it silent to his grave, the cost of it, because to him it was not a thing to be praised. It was only what a man owed a man who had carried him out of the fire. The county that laughed at him came, over the years, to call him the finest man among them, and they were right, though they had needed to be shown it, and the showing of it had nearly cost him his life and had cost him everything else. He kept on whittling those little horses until his hands grew too stiff to hold the knife. After he passed, I gathered them up from all over the house, off the windowsills and the mantel and the bottoms of the children's keepsake boxes, and I set them all together on one long shelf in the front room, and there were more than I could count. I understood then what each one had been. They were not toys. They were the only kind of promise Jonah Reed ever made, the kind a man does not speak but carves out of cedar and leaves quietly where you will find it, asking nothing, expecting nothing, given freely whether you ever noticed or not. I had 11 suitors the summer the wells went dry, and 10 of them offered me the world in beautiful words, and the 11th offered me nothing at all but the work of his hands and a little wooden horse for a child. I have lived long enough now to know the whole truth of it, and it is this: the loudest offer is most often the emptiest, and a man's worth is never the thing he shows you across a fine parlor. It is the thing he gives away in the dark when he believes no one is watching, the cost he pays and never mentions, the water he digs out of solid rock for someone who cannot pay him back. I married the man in rags, and the rags were the proof. I only wish I had understood, sooner than I did, that they were the richest thing that ever came up my road.